While I'm thinking of it, I might as well add frequency stresses capacitors, but coils actually benefit from frequency. And instead of frequency stressing coils, it's low frequency that stresses coils. This is what I'm getting from the error messages when I fool around with this thing. If I lower the henries, the inductance on the on these pair of coils over here, I can get an error message. And that's why I had to turn to lowering the frequency as a last resort. But actually, this is my first choice for lowering my wattage, is to lower the inductance on these coils. But only if I can get away with it. So, lowering the frequency helps me get away with it. Wait a minute, that means it's the same. High frequency stresses the coils. Oh. Oh, so high frequency stresses everything. Ew. Yeah, I think that's it. High frequency stresses everything, that's right. Oh, okay. Whatever. I'll get this straight one of these days. You know, it's complicated, all these details. So frequency, what's it good for? That's a good point. What's it good for? Well, it drives this thing. It creates the excitation necessary to get the over unity. And then it's a question of, well, what does it take minimally? And that's what I'm trying to investigate. And also to create a condition in which these capacitors don't have an absurd level of equivalent series resistance that makes them not buildable. You know, things like that. I got my wire sizes down pretty good. They're reasonable. But the capacitors at the moment, you know, who wants to pressurize a capacitor and then hope to gain that level of equivalent series resistance, which at the moment is around 90 ohms? It's just, even 90 is better than 1 million, but still, 90 is more than 10, and 10 is what you can buy. 1 ohm you can buy of equivalent series resistance in a capacitor, or 10 I think is the limit. I might be wrong, 1 might be the limit. But normally we get them, they have 10 milliohms of equivalent series resistance if we're using ceramic capacitors. So I'm trying to be realistic too at the same time. Those are my other goals I forgot to mention. I'm trying to make this thing buildable so that, you know, somebody might be able to replicate this and actually build it, actualize it, instead of just me coughing up theories about my, you know, my notions of over unity. Anyway, I thought I'd mention that. So I guess I had it wrong. It's frequency that can get in the way of me lowering. See, frequency gets in the way of me lowering the henries, the inductance on these coils. But I try to lower these first. That's my first option because I get a nice lowering of wattage when I do that. But when I lower the capacitors, I actually get an increase of wattage. Not just an increase of amps over volts in a ratio, but overall I get more power. And so my first option is to lower these coils, but if I get an error message from the simulator, then my last resort is to lower the frequency. And then I have to go back. I have to remember, oh yeah, I'm supposed to go back to lowering the coils and not just keep lowering the frequency. Oops. And because I have to make sure I don't lose the gain I make of amps over volts, which I tend to lose occasionally anyway. But every time I get to lower the equivalent series resistance of these capacitors, or lower their ferrets for that matter, I get a gain in amps over volts. So, you know, it all works out. Eventually, I guess I'll figure it out. I just thought I'd mention this. And so I clear things up. I didn't understand. Frequency stresses everything. So what does it take minimally? Now, Tesla, according to Arthur Matthews, Tesla used a frequency of what was it, 500 cycles per second, which times 60 is 3,000 RPM. So he had a motor in 1897. He did all his work prior to J.P. Morgan giving him the axe, you know, the financial equivalent of an axe. Not in the 1930s. I don't know where that story... Okay, whatever. I do know, but whatever. yeah, he did all his good work when he was younger, and his important work of development and research. So the Pierce Arrow demonstration of 1931 never happened. It happened in 1897, and it was a 3,000 RPM motor, which had to gear down using hydraulic transmission. So I'm hoping that I can get rid of the pressurized capacitor, you know, to satisfy the Byron Brubaker story that he had a pressure gauge on the dashboard. Well, what was he pressurizing? Was it a capacitor, or was it the hydraulic system? I'm hoping it's the hydraulic system and not the capacitors, both to satisfy my own bent, but also the Arthur Matthews story, which is part of my bent. Okay, enough.